Okay, friends, now we can go on. This is Adventures in Identification, number 7. I like to use the word adventures. I don't have too much Sagittarius in my chart, but a little bit at the vertex. And there's always the idea of penetrating into a new dimension, something that is not yet experienced in the consciousness, and always going beyond, in a Jupiterian fashion, the next ring pass knot, even breaking the ring pass knot in a Uranian fashion, or somehow dissolving it, as we can do in relation to Neptune. We are in the midst of analyzing an ancient Atlantean chant which is related to the taking of the third initiation. Of course, this is a relevant subject because it is between the second and third initiation that the theme of identification and of approach to Sanat Kumara becomes important, even possible, because the will at the second degree has begun to dominate desire. So by the time the third degree is taken, the monad, representing pure being, is in a position consciously to be recognized. That dimension of awareness, that state of understanding which we call monadic, is in a position to be recognized. And so the sun becomes the ruler of the final decade of Capricorn, in which archetypally initiation is taken. And the sun, as ruler of Leo and exalted planet in Aries, becomes the symbol of pure being, the symbol of our true identity, and that with which, and as which, we seek to identify. So when a stanza is specifically given to the approach to the third initiation, and certainly so many of us have these requirements in mind, even if the actual event lies ahead, it is fitting then that we be able to think of such a stanza as this in relation to at least the beginning of the process of identification, in which the master of the fifth degree has mastered far more than we will be capable of, far more than will be possible for us. And on it goes, of course, with higher degrees, the Christ having achieved a degree of identification with and as humanity, with and as the planetary logos, which is far beyond anything we can imagine. So let us begin with the 6 verses we have already studied, and then go on to verse number 7 and number 8, which will conclude our preliminary examination of this ancient Atlantean stanza. I stand between the heavens and earth. I vision God. I see the forms God took. I hate them both. Naught do they mean to me, for one I cannot reach, and for the lower of the two I have no longer any love. Torn am I. Space and its life I cannot know, and so I want it not. Time and its myriad forms I know too well. Pendant I hang betwixt the two, desiring neither. God from high heaven speaks. There is a change. I hear with ear attentive, and listening turn my head. That which I visioned, yet visioning could not reach, seems nearer, is nearer to my heart. Old longings come again, yet die. Old chains of glamour snap. Forward I rush. Myriads of voices speak and halt me in my tracks. The thunder of the sounds of earth shuts out the voice of God. I turn me on my forward path and vision once again the long-held joys of earth and flesh and kin. I lose the vision of eternal things. The voice of God dies out. Torn again am I, but only for a little time. Backward and forward shifts my little self, e'en as a bird soars into heaven and settles back again upon the tree. Yet God in his high place outlasts the little bird. Thus do I know that God will victor be, and later hold my mind and me in thrall. The power of the mind to reveal the real. It is not only the slayer of the real, of course. Hark to the joyous paean that I chant, the work is done. My ear is deaf to all the calls of earth, except to that small voice of all the hidden souls within the outer forms, for they are as myself. With them I am as one. The necessity for knowing our oneness with all souls, our identicality with the being which lies at the heart of all soul experiences, and even our capability one day, as we expand into greater and greater rings past naught, to perceive simultaneously as all points of sentiency, all souls are perceiving. This will indeed be entry into the all-seeing eye. It's interesting, the pun there, the all-seeing eye, an organ of perception, and the all-seeing identity, the all-seeing I, the identity, which in fact we are, but have not awakened to the fact of our all-seeingness. It will be revealed that we, on the higher levels of our being, which have ever been, have been seeing all simultaneously. And I suppose that memory of that sight will be vouchsafed to us when we attain the necessary point of tension on the higher levels of our energy system, where we become more than the limited individual which we think we are. The seventh verse, God's voice rings clear, and in its tones and overtones the little voices of the little forms dim and fade out. I dwell within a world of unity. I know all souls are one. So here there is definite accomplishment. And there is no longer a conflict between the voices to which one attends. God indeed is victor. God is holding his mind and him in thrall. The joy of realization is his. The identification with and all and as all souls has been achieved. I think as DK has told us that if we wish to understand identification, we have to achieve identification with at least one other person, one other actual individual. I tried to find the quote for you, but this very practical level of identification is needed before it can be expanded to the whole. So to the extent that we learn to love another individual as a soul and feel with sensitivity all that that individual is undergoing and begin to merge our sense of identity with that other individual, and then of course a group and so forth, identification in the larger sense can have its beginning. So there are many, psychological inharmonies or disharmonies to work through, many artificial barriers of perception and of energy contrast to work through before that merging with another individual as one being can occur. This is no form of egoism. It is a form of perception which transcends egoism. And we must begin close at hand, identifying with those immediately present before we can begin to include the larger scene, the entourage, as DK says. In a way, it's a form of inclusiveness. I'll show you something here from Letters on Occult Meditation, where DK talks about the method of destroying the causal body, which is significant of the second ray soul. He says, when the egoic ray is the second, or the love wisdom ray, the path of least resistance lies along the line of expansion and of a gradual inclusion. It is not so much a driving forward, as is the case with the first ray, as it is a gradual expanding from an inner center to include the entourage, the environment, the allied souls, and the affiliated groups of pupils under some one master. See, it still has its limitations. It's mostly along ray line or the qualitative line, until all are included in the consciousness. So one has, in a way, infiltrated the consciousness of those who are included, just as a master can do with respect to our consciousness, as we become outposts of his consciousness. Carried to the point of achievement, this expansion results in the final shattering of the causal body at the fourth initiation. And then he summarizes, in the first instance, the achievement via the power ray, the driving forward and forcing upward had a like result. The open channel admitted the downflow of force or fire from the spirit, and the causal body in time is equally destroyed. But we see expansion, inclusion, embracing, identification with and as a merging or a fusing of consciousnesses until we might say, well, whose experience is it really? whose experience is really occurring. Okay. So, God's voice rings clear, not just a voice that is heard and which is subject to fade away when the voices of the sounds of earth thunderously veil the voice of God, because that's no longer possible. The ear has achieved a certain deafness to all the calls of earth, at least to all the elemental calls, the calls of the vehicles per se. But it has not achieved deafness to the call of the soul. It is, in fact, very sensitive to the call of the soul. I'm thinking of the second stanza for the second ray, dealing with sensitivity. See if I can find that. This has to do with reverberate through the silence. Reverberate. Let's see. I think this should do it. Let all the life be drawn to the center, and enter thus into the heart of love divine. Then from that point of sentient life, let the soul realize the consciousness of God. Let the word go forth, reverberating through the silence. Naught is but me. We can certainly see how we can relate this stanza, found in several places in the books, but here summarized in Esoteric Psychology 1, the 7 keys to the 7-ray methods. Let all the life be drawn to the center and enter thus into the heart of love divine. Then from that point of sentient life, let the soul realize the consciousness of God. That all-pervading consciousness, that is what is realized. No localized, form-encapsulated consciousness, but a consciousness which pervades all forms, self-conscious, unself-conscious, superconscious. Let the word go forth, reverberating through the silence, which is a quality with which the second ray is much associated, calmness and silence. Naught is but me. So read and understand this particular key to the second ray method in conjunction with the eightfold stanza we are now studying. So the voice of God is now clearly heard, and the ringing is like the ringing of a bell, again a second ray image. The bell pertains to the second ray, and the ring of truth is here, the truth of God. And it has tones and overtones which suggests that the higher dimensions are included, because in these overtone trees, as my colleague Harold Moses likes to describe, the higher dimensions of life, the higher vibratory spheres, the higher vibrations are implicated. So the voice is ringing clear, not just on the lower tones, but ringing clear in all dimensions upon which this candidate is consciousness. And by now it begins to include the inclusive realms of the spiritual triad, which is the place whereon the true ego or the truer identity can be found. God's voice rings clear. It's no more through a glass darkly or through a door from one room to another where the tones can be muffled, but a great and clear resounding of the divine is occurring within the consciousness, because now the man is initiate, whether or not he has received the confirmation of the actual ceremony of the initiation. His consciousness stands at that level of unity where he can, with truth, be declared an initiate of the third degree. Venus is achieving its consummation in him, being the hierarchical planet of Capricorn, the third degree sign, the archetypal third degree sign, and the sun, as the symbol of the spirit, is rising on the mountain top of his life and indicating the beginning of monadic life. God's voice rings clear, and in its tones and overtones, the little voices of the little forms, not just human forms, but all kinds of forms, all kinds of elemental forms and aggregations of tiny elemental lives, the calls of Earth, the calls of the lunar sphere, the calls of lower worlds over which, in one mode, Vulcan, Neptune, and Uranus preside. These lures back to more material life are dimming in the consciousness. They are fading out. They are losing their decibel level. They are fading away into non-registration. They are there, and the initiate can focus on them at any time that he wishes, but in a way, he has entered that stage in which form is being blotted out. Again, not that he is impractical and cannot deal with form if he chooses to focus consciousness in that way, but it has no compelling power over him. He is not the slave of form. He has chosen this kind of submission, if you will, or slavery to the very highest source. So the little voices of the little forms dim and fade out, and in the lives of so many of us, those little voices are very loud indeed and very distracting, and are sonic veils upon the true voice of God. First upon the still small voice, and then upon the higher voice of the still higher principles within us. We have to ask ourselves what types of voices we hear and the degree to which we are compelled to be attentive to them, or the degree to which we can choose, if we will, to be attentive to them or not. Then comes the realization. It is the triumphant realization. I dwell within a world of unity. So in every direction that the candidate looks, let's call him by this time the initiate, he sees not disparity, not unreconciled variety, but unity, lines of unification, so that he knows that all of these contents of consciousness are really one pattern and are part of one rapidly unifying field. There are so many perceptions which are discordant and seem to arrest our attention, and to which we can react with an emotional charge, which is divisive. But here it is possible to stand back and somehow see and feel the confluence of all things into each other, all things flowing into each other. And of course it helps to practice this, to ask ourselves to what extent do we dwell within a world of unity, to what extent can we penetrate beneath the qualities, however discordant, that any form presents, to that area or field within the form with which we can find ourselves at one, the soul field. And when we find that, we even have a way of seeing how the outer discordance can be reconciled, can be brought into a state of more obvious unity. But first, this penetration, because the unity comes from within. It is a second-rate factor, a soul factor. It describes a fact which exists. The will to unify is a type of will pertaining to the second ray of love wisdom. Even taking this as a mantra for a number of days, I dwell within a world of unity. Not letting any day pass wherein the obvious, the demanding, the pressing, the agitating, those factors create a veil which hides the unity. To be conscious of that felt sense of relationship, of essentially being one thing, of the seamlessness of life, even though there are so many forms which seem, to the normal consciousness, to divide. We have to have that type of consciousness which perceives beyond the possibility of division. Then we will no longer live in illusion. Then we will not have that prerequisite for illusory perception, fragmentation. We have to transcend fragmentation, even though it presents itself as a fairly obvious fact, I suppose no more so than in conditions of war and violence, or where harsh criticism is rampant. So this discerning mind, this power to see within and beyond the obvious fragmentation and disharmony, is something that has to be cultivated if we are to achieve the state here described. I dwell within a world of unity. I've unified the whole world. You know, under Cancer, we are told that the whole is seen as one. That is for the true disciple or initiate under Cancer. If we go to this page, we will see it. Here it is. Esoteric Astrology, page 332. The whole is seen as one. The whole is seen as one. And one senses the unification of humanity. And this is a perception, I think, which is given under the higher expression of Neptune, which removes artificial barriers induced by limited lower ego consciousness. So all the way from blindness and encapsulation to wholeness and oneness. It's a gradual, inclusive process that DK was describing in terms of breaking the causal body. But think of it, Cancer rules every causal body in a sense, because The causal body is a temple, a containing, protective enclosure in which something holy can be stored. So all the way from deep encapsulation to the awakening process, which we have here in the center, until we finally discover the oneness of the whole, and we embrace humanity. This is given under the sign Cancer as its higher impressions develop. I know all souls are one. And this is true knowledge. And if we think of the 14th rule for disciples and initiates, we see that, let us say, it begins with the word know. So here we are, going to number 14. The applicants who are rising towards the third initiation eventually have the words listen, touch, see, apply, and know. But the true initiate of the third degree begins with the word know, which in a sense is like the first degree. And you can apply this, interestingly, to the group from the first to the fifth degree, or it can be applied from the third degree to the seventh. And I think this is very clear because the true name of the fifth degree is the revelation, and the true name of the seventh degree is the resurrection. And so a different sequence of processes is indicated if know represents the third degree, express the fourth, reveal the fifth, destroy, which can well be a higher type of atmic causal body, a destruction which liberates the volatile essence into its monadic sphere, and resurrect may be the opening of that monadic vehicle so that the volatile essence can fly up onto the logoic plane, just as is the case with the Christ at this time, both he and the Buddha, I suspect, being focused for service purposes on the logoic plane, sitting, as it were, at the right hand of God in Shambhala. The Christ certainly has entry and right to Shambhala, but seems to be a mediating energy as head of the hierarchy, and yet with the right of entry into Shambhala. So know means something either at the first degree or at the third degree. I am the one I got. Yes. I know all souls are one, and that is a knowing which I think should be a powerful theme for meditation, a persistent theme for meditation for many of us until we can be certain under all circumstances and variations, under all vicissitudes, that all souls are one. And this we can feel within our heart and within the heart in the head. I think it has to be felt. It's a kind of knowing in which there is a subtle feeling as well. It's not just cognitive knowing where we say I know and don't really know with intimacy. We have identified with and as the other souls, apparently other souls, that we claim to be at one, with which we claim to be at one. So you can practice, take any individual and study them as a symbol and move from the outer towards the inner, discounting the importance of the outer. That doesn't mean one doesn't understand it, but discounting its spiritual importance as we move to find the center of that individual. And as we find that center, we begin to fuse with that center until we get the feeling, as it were, that there is no difference between what I may know myself to be and what I know the other to be, and work on sustaining that sense of identity, identicality, emerging in consciousness with even one other, and then if we can attempt it, emerging in being. And once we are successful at that level and have discounted the outer distractions of form, which for so many of us provide such a barrier, we are, as it were, put off, put off by what we find physically or emotionally or mentally, put off, repelled. And we can never go deeper and discern that soul presence of the other. But that soul presence is a real thing, and we want to register it and dwell within its presence, dwell within its registration, and gradually moving beyond all formal aspects of it, merge with it so that one is not put off, but feels the merging. I think the heart must be involved. And perhaps if it can be imagined that the heart and the head is also activated, we will get into the yoga of identification. I'm sure it must be related to the yoga of synthesis. And this yoga of identification is a particular facility of those masters who remain with the earth for a longer time on the path of earth service. The mind, as customarily used, as Dikhe tells us, like a spinning wheel, can cast off the other and make the fusion very difficult. So we have to be in an aspect of ourselves at that time, which is not the mind per se, but we have to be activating our identificatory powers, our powers of identification. We need Neptune here. We need the permeation of the membrane, which apparently separates one individual from another. We need to move through it, dissolve it, beyond it, and achieve a kind of fusion of substances. Of course, remember, substance is really the identity of God. So I'm speaking in Neptunian terms here. We might also come to, once this flow, this permeating flow begins, we might come to kind of a moment of shocking identification of core with core as the same. And that would be occurring a bit more under Uranus. But I think it is crucial for us not to treat these words as merely words. I know all souls are one. I know all souls are one. And until we can make this sentence an item of knowledge, retrievable at will. And we have not arrived at this state of attainment, this necessary point of tension, where we have achieved the consciousness of the third degree and can be confirmed as third degree initiates. But remember, of course, like I say, from the time that will begins to dominate desire, one can move in this direction. So, since the majority of DK's disciples were hovering around the second degree, or just after, let us say, the pursuit of identification was, for them, a reasonable pursuit with possibility of attainment. God's voice rings clear, and in its tones and overtones, the little voices of the little forms dim and fade out. I dwell within a world of unity. I know all souls are one. So, for a month, 2 months, a year, I know all souls are one. That the group realize there are no other selves. The group know there is no color, only light. And then let darkness take the place of light, hiding all difference, blotting out all form. This is that wonderful Rule 9, which represents a type of completion. Rule 9 of the 14 rules for disciples and initiates, describing either the third initiation or the fifth, depending on how we look at that. The final verse, swept am I, it's a great power, swept am I by the universal life, and as I sweep upon my onward way, the way of God, I see all lesser energies die out while they are seen as aspects of the major energy that I am. And obviously, the initiate here is going on more than his own personal power. The universal life, I don't think means the life of the entirety of the cosmos, but I think it means at least the life of the solar logos. Because remember that the third in our normal series of initiations is the first solar initiation. So the life of our local universe, which is our solar system, is beginning to sweep through the initiate. And this life is registering on the cosmic ethers. The Antikarana has been completed, at least in its first stage. And the universal life is now sweeping through the etheric mechanism. And the initiate is definitely supported by this great current, this great sweep of solar logoic life, of which the planetary logoic life is an aspect. So the initiate is moving now. It's the way forward. The first ray is there, driving forward through space, the idea of progress onward. As I sweep over my onward way, the first ray and the first ray motion is there, progress onward, which is the way of God, or the way of the monad within man. I see all lesser energies die out. Let the group know, let the group see that all the 18 fires die down, and that the lesser lives return under the reservoir of life. Group see that all the 18 fires die down. So the lunar realm, the lower 18 fires, are indeed dying down. Now, we're not at the fourth degree yet, but it certainly is leading in that direction. The 18 fires are dying down. The man is truly a soul-infused personality. The solar angel can express now a much fuller measure, not all, but a much fuller measure of its inherent energy. And although the lower energies are there, the perception in this experience is that they are dying out and that something much more important, much more unitary, much more synthetic is taking their place. Now, Master is a practical being. He can return at any time to deal with lower energies, just as Master DK does. Just think the kinds of specific energies he discusses, their source, their modus operandi, their destination, how he discusses all this in esoteric healing and in esoteric psychology, relating energies to astrological and ray factors and to the chakras. It's very specific, but all of this is contained in the sense of the onward moving universal life. And the solar system is driving forward through space. It may be revolving around the Pleiades, but at the same time the solar system and accompanying systems, and really I suppose the one about whom naught may be said, of whom we can conceive of the Pleiades as the center, is moving forward, onward, as well as revolving. So we have dual motions. One is revolving around a center, and the other is a driving forward through space, a type of progress onward. So in perception, at least, during this experience, the lesser energies no longer obtrude. They are given their hierarchical position. It is much lower position than the great energy of God, the energy of God, the Solar Logos, the universal life. Then come these marvelous statements in the 8th verse. I am the one, I God. I am the form in which all forms are merged. I am the soul in which all souls are fused. I am the life, and in that life all little lives remain. So there, right there, is a theme of meditation for 4 years. Each one of these sentences, a year, or should it be a decade? I am the one, I God. So at last there is a monadic realization, an undeferrable realization of oneness. The whole is seen as one. The unity has been isolated. The initiate dwells within a state of isolated unity. And this means that of all the many perceptions of which he is still capable, the perception of the unity is always paramount, and he does not lose that perception even as he deals with diversity. There is such a thing as diversity outside the unity, and then there is diversity within it, and that is the security of the 3rd degree, that diversity never again need be perceived outside the unity. God is the one. There are many gods, of course, and we're not talking about polytheism here. We're talking about emanationism. In a way, there's only one God, but all the other gods are emanations of the one and aspects of the one, and essentially are very fully the one, even though manifesting in different scopes of expression. So there's a great expansion of the sense of identity here. And let's just say, suppose it expanded to the planetary sphere or to the solar systemic sphere of the universal life. That would be enough. Of course, once having achieved that, one could forever expand the rings past naught and realize that the macrocosmic life is all there is, as in Rule 5. Depends on what we call the macrocosm. Usually the macrocosm is the solar logos. But the concept admits an almost endless expansion until you find yourself dealing with what can't be dealt with, namely the absolute, the ultimate macrocosm. I am the one. To be realized in the heart and the mind simultaneously, it is a statement of identification. Not just I am identified with the one. You have a duality there, this and that. But I am the one, which means that all barriers between essences have been removed. They are always removed, in fact, but they've been removed in perception. So now one knows that the essence of the one is one's own essence. And there is a great expansion of the sense of identity, and we call it God. It's not blasphemous, it's God specified as the one universal being than which there is none other. If there is none other, then all other beings are not other than God, although they seem to be other than God because of the more limited scope of consciousness associated with them. I am the one. I, God. And this is a lot different than identifying with one's, so to speak, skin-encapsulated ego, as it has been said. One certainly goes far beyond the normal ring-pass knot of identity, far beyond the causal body, far beyond the group, and even beyond the planet, and begins to challenge all rings pass knot, dwelling upon what the one really is. I mean, to a certain extent, it is the solar logos, and that is far beyond our ken anyway. We could practice our visualization within the ring pass knot of the planetary logos or the solar logos. That in itself would be identity expanding in a tremendous sense. But it goes beyond that as well. I am the one I got. You tell that to people and you say you are God. Well, they don't understand. They think you're making a claim to be the fully conscious transcendent power, but what you're dealing with is an identity in essence and not yet in act or in expression. One who knows his personal or individual limits can still say, I am the one, I, God. Does not mean that one is claiming as a person or an individual to be the master of the universe. Far from it. But one day, of course, when God is all in all and there is a retraction of all emanations of the one universal logos, then we will be able to declare in full consciousness, I am the one, I, God, and in manifest power, too. I am the form in which all forms are merged. Well, when we normally think of our form, maybe we think of 2 hands and 2 legs and 2 feet and 2 eyes and so forth. That's our form. But there is the great form of God that was seen by Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, revealed to him by Krishna. And is it so difficult, I wonder, to look at all the many forms and see them as one thing, as composite within one form? Many delineations apparently, but they are all united in this great atomic sea, the atoms of which are of all degrees of density and refinement. So one can begin to see forms as wholes. and to go beyond the distinctions and demarcations between forms and begin to reconcile the apparently delineated into one form until one begins to look at diversified contents of consciousness and say, one form. Extending this to the planet, one practices one form. And realizing that the essential I that one is, which is God, is that form. God is the form and the forms. And since I am God, I am the form and the forms. In this sense of including all forms and being all forms, not just of the planet, but of the entire solar system and beyond, begins to impress itself upon the consciousness. But one, of course, has to dwell with that, live with that, so that it becomes ever more impressible or impressed until it begins to be real, and one realizes it, sees with real eyes, realizes it. And it doesn't just become a concept, something to think about, but it takes on a knowingness, a living realization. I am the form. So when you look at I remember walking with my son one day, we were talking about pantheism. We were talking about the pervasion of God and the extension of identity into all things. And I said something like, well, I am all things. He says, you mean even the asphalt? And because we were looking down on the road. And I said, yeah, even the asphalt. So to identify as even the lowest atomic forms and realize that they are all moving within me, they are moving because of me, began, and they are me moving. It's a, exercise in identification where we drop our usual self-conceptions. You look in the mirror, what you see is what you get, but that's not quite correct. You have to look in the world mirror, something much greater. I am the soul in which all souls are fused. Soul here has to be, I think, defined as sensitivity, sentiency, consciousness. See, we're talking about I am the great in which the little is found. The big form in which all forms emerge, the big sentiency, the big soul. The big simultaneously multidimensional consciousness in which all spheres of consciousness are fused. There are many eyes to Argus, the 10,000 eyes, billions of eyes which have eyes. And all those simultaneous states of consciousness are one perception in which the accomplished yogi can slip into which, from one sphere to another, perceiving as any perceiver perceives, within reason, of course. Obviously, the yogi has his limitations. Without permission, you don't go knocking on the door of a higher consciousness and saying, okay, I'm going to perceive exactly as you perceive. There are these hermetic seals which allow you in when you are ready, and then you undergo a great expansion of consciousness. But I am the sentiency in which all sentiencies are fused. I am the touching in which all touchings are fused. I am the registering in which all registrations are fused. So your experience doesn't belong just to you. It belongs to whatever can pervade your experience, can fuse with your consciousness. A master can know exactly what I'm thinking, doing, touching, whatever. He has the capacity as consciousness is a fluid something, to merge his consciousness with mine. On the lower turn of the spiral, you say to someone, I know exactly what you're thinking. It's a kind of you've slipped in there for a moment and you've caught the thought, and you spent a moment inside that consciousness which was generating some thought or having some reaction. You have done a little bit of what the master can do in an expert fashion.